So I was reading a lot of YouTube comments yesterday and people were asking the same old questions. How do I improve at this game as a new player? What should I focus on? How do I escape the low ranks and so on? And they were getting the same old advice. Focus more on evasion and whiff punishment. Don't focus too much on combos and launchers because real Tekken is actually all about movement. And I thought that was interesting because it's an old mantra that I've been hearing since I was a completely new starry-eyed Tekken player. Have I finally gotten old enough as a Tekken player that I can start bitching about back in my day? You know, I started playing at the very tail end of Tekken Tag 2 when that game was already dying. So in terms of like playing and talking about this game, I'm still a complete greenhorn. But when I was trying to learn, I'd go to Tekken Zaibatsu or to YouTube videos, and the advice that I always got was don't get honeydicked by damage and launchers, focus completely on movement. It's the only way to get anywhere. Not learning movement is like the big noob trap, and it's hard because it's very execution intense. And then I was watching a lot of streams of like really high level players. I was playing matches myself yesterday and I was struck by how little movement seems to matter in comparison to how emphasized it is still in Tekken discourse. I think movement is very overhyped in modern Tekken. So I went back and looked at some old footage of some Tekken Tag 2 stuff, and I found this clip that I wanted to show you just a bit of. This is final round 18, and it's JDCR versus Jimmy J, so two of the greatest players of all time. I wanted to have JDCR in the clip because the reason he's considered by many people, I think me included, the greatest player of all time is when Tekken was the most movementy, he was like the god of movement. He achieved amazing things, and he talked a lot about how when 7 came out and movement was more restrained, how he felt sort of claustrophobic and limited by that. So I was looking for JDCR matches, but it's actually Jimmy J who really impressed me in this specific match. It's up on Team Spooky's channel. I haven't asked permission to use it. Hopefully it's cool. If you want to see the whole thing, go to Team Spooky's channel. But just look at what happens in this match whenever the two players go back to neutral. They will have a quick scramble, neutral will happen, and then they just start twitching and sliding around with this crazy movement at a pace that is just like, I don't think we see anything like it in Tekken 7 these days. The snake edge right there, kind of unconventional. But if you look at just the pace of the movement, and it's also interesting how like after sidestepping, the characters seem to remain off axis for longer, which allows it for, more evasion. But look at Jimmy J right here. Look at the pace of his movement. These backdashes interspersed with sidesteps and sidestep guarding. So even if you attempt an evade and a whiff punish, even if you get caught by a move that tracks to that side, you can actually block it by side. Look at the pace of this movement. It's like he's having a seizure on roller skates. And stuff like this doesn't really happen in Tekken 7 or in modern Tekken anymore. So what direction has the franchise gone in? If you talk to a lot of people who commentate on this, they will say, I mean, I've talked to Main Man, for example, about this a lot, how the focus has gone much more towards specifically mix-ups, because when you're locked down and your movement is limited, you're forced to stand across from your opponent, and now you're going to be threatened by all these options that you can't evade using movement. And so if you don't have momentum, if your opponent has the advantage and they're going to mix you, then you just have to deal with the mix-up. You can't neutralize it with movement options. And I think that's true. I think something like that has been happening in Tekken, and I think it's been happening intentionally. I think the people who developed this game wanted it to be more like that, because mix-ups it's interesting. It's kind of like the thing that bridges the gap between high-level players and lower-level players. I think it's much more common in 7 that someone inexperienced will be able to take games on somebody very experienced because mix-ups are so emphasized. So you can think about it this way: if you are playing against the very greatest Tekken player in the world, who is just peaking in terms of performance, but you manage to put that player in a genuine mix-up situation where there's so much disadvantage that they can't move, they can't option, so like they have to guess whether or not the next move is going to be a mid or a low, and both options are completely unreactable and way too fast. That is a genuine guessing situation, and if they guess wrong, it doesn't matter how good they are at Tekken, they're still going to take that damage. And if it's Tekken 7, they're probably going to get launched and then lose more than half of their life bar, maybe the entire round, depending on walls and Oki and what character you're playing and stuff like that. So mix-ups are kind of the big equalizer, but I think something interesting that has been happening that isn't necessarily intentional, doesn't necessarily come from Namco, is that has then evolved into something that is even more restrained and even more boxed in. I want to talk a bit about that, so I think we're going to cut this and I want to go into practice mode and show you exactly what I mean. Okay, so we're in here with Zafina and Brian. Zafina is both a good and a bad example of what I want to talk about, because she has some of these moves I want to show you, but then again, she kind of weirdly retained her Tekken Tag 2 level movement, and I think it might be the reason I enjoy playing her more than almost any other character these days, because it's more the style of evasive Tekken that I fell in love with when I picked the game up for the first time, and if you really enjoy that style, you can play her. You can play Lily, who still sidesteps very well and can like step guard. Still works for her to the extent that Lily works as a character. I personally think she's underrated, but maybe that's a different video. But let's talk about this shift then from like hyper advanced twitchy movement to the more Tekken 7 brand of neutral, which is more unga bunga kind of get to the mix up, you know? So what shape does that usually come in? Well, you do a move like this to collect your plus frames. Doesn't matter if the opponent blocks or gets hit, because you still get your advantage. And now it's time to mix, so just pick your move. There's the low, and now you've mastered basic Tekken 7 and you can play with the best of them, right? Well, I mentioned earlier how I feel like this has started to evolve and morph into something even more restricted and, in my opinion, boring to watch. And I started thinking about this when I was watching Arslan Ash play Zafina specifically, because I want to learn from him. I want to get better with this character, and he's definitely the guy to watch for that. But something that he really likes this move, 443, right? But he won't necessarily do it and then like stay in stance and do a stance mix-up. He'll do stuff like apply this move and then do nothing, and then maybe do the move again, and maybe do it a third time. And think about why that might be happening and what it allows you to do. If I do this, and I want to mix the opponent, I'm at least opening up myself to the chance of losing, because my opponent can guess right and low parry my mix-up, or maybe parry it somehow, or use an armor move. You know, there's at least a chance that I'm the one who's going to lose in that situation. But if I just do this and attempt it, and then don't really capitalize on my advantage, I'm exposing myself to very, very minor risk, and then eventually I score a counter hit, and now I'm going to run away with a massive amount of damage, especially in this version of the game where damage is so high, right? There are many, many moves who kind of work like this and fall into this category. I mean, have you ever seen this move before? It's kind of common in neutral and Tekken right now, right? And think about other, like for example, safe counter hit mids that you can kind of do until you stick one. Very low risk. I mean, I made a list. Brian back 1, Brian 3+4, Fuckum Ram 3+4, Asuka 443, Zafina 443, Lily down 43, Dragunov while running 2, Kunimitsu set 2, and the list goes on. Like literally the list goes on. I made a way longer list than I needed for this video, but I think Kuni set 2 is the sort of foaming crest of that wave, and it's interesting because she's the latest character and a sort of indication of course with the game right now. With that move, you don't even have to worry about where you are on the stage. It takes care of that for you as well. You just do the move and it teleports onto the opponent and checks, do they want to get counter hit launched? No, okay, no big deal, attempt it again. Maybe they want to get launched this time. Doesn't necessarily have to be counter hit moves, it just tends to be, because those counter hit moves usually allow you for plus frames on block, which is very, very powerful. But you can have stuff like axe kicks from Kazuya, pause down for 2, or orbitals. I have an entire script for a video I wanted to do called Fuck Orbitals, where I just talk about how fucking tired I am of orbitals in this game, because in a game where movement is this restricted, orbitals kind of just become safe hop kicks, and I don't think we want safe hop kicks in a game like this. And think about all the orbitals that keep on showing up on like DLC characters, if you include the punching versions. Geese, Fuckum Ram, Leroy, Brian, and then, you know, less prolific but still powerful moves like, you know, Shaheen, Lars, Josie, and so on. Kind of low risk. I mean, the worst that's going to happen is you sort of eat a mix-up, unless the opponent is like really good in trying to jab you out of the air, but then when it connects, you know, it's like collect a round, you know. So very, very skewed. And the way this used to, I want to tie this back into movement, right? The way that all of these extremely powerful safe moves used to be neutralized and balanced is they were very risky risky because of what movement allowed you to do. One of the most eye-opening things I ever saw, I wish I remembered who wrote it, but it was a post on Tekken Zaibatsu back in the day where this guy explained how in Tekken there's not really any such thing as a safe move, because whenever you attack, you open yourself up to the risk of, first of all, being counter hit on the way in, which is still a thing, but then also the opponent might not be there by the time the move lands because they can move out of the way, and now you're going to get a whiff punished. And Ares used to say how when you play Tekken well, your right hand really needs to be very passive. Your left hand is doing all of the work because that's the movement hand. You're moving around preemptively, and then when you see an opportunity that you want to capitalize on, that's when you attack. You know, you're playing very reactively, and what that allows you to do is it makes the match extremely dynamic because you have two people constantly watching it and having to react to one another. If you watch some high-level Tekken these days, something that you see a lot is they kind of take turns doing very safe, good moves until one connects, and then they just collect a combo. It becomes this kind of stale sort of safety dance, you know. We can launch if we want to, we can leave low ranks behind. And I personally think that's a lot less interesting than this more sort of dynamic version of Tekken that I think existed in Tag 2. Now, I'm not going to be all nostalgic and praise Tag 2 here, because that game definitely had its own problems, and even Tekken's core audience weren't really in love with that game. But I think an important distinction to make between this game and Tekken Tag 2 is Tekken Tag 2 was not very commercially successful. Tekken 7 has been extremely commercially successful, and the developers seem very focused on, mainly when they developed the game, the commercial success of the franchise, obviously, to nobody's surprise, right? And one of the big successes of Tekken 7 is probably the fact that it has made it more approachable for a casual audience or for new players, and a big part of that is restricting movement in this way, because what happened in Tekken Tag 2 is you started playing, you ran into somebody who knew movement, and not only could you not win, you couldn't really even ever touch them because they were everywhere, Not only could you, even if you did a move that tracked to the specific side they were stepping, they would step guard you, and then you'd need a block punish, and it was completely, or felt completely impossible to catch up to legacy players back then, which is kind of what hooked me, because it was just such a challenge. And when it started to seem to work out for you, it was just such an exciting feeling, So I personally prefer a version of Tekken that is more movement focused, but this game doesn't belong to me or anybody else, and so who am I to say what Tekken should be going into the future? I do think it's interesting that when you hear the developers talk about the direction they want to go in with future titles, it's much more focus on specifically casual audiences, and they want to they keep on mentioning games like Fortnite and Fall Guys and the success of those games, and I think those games are, yes, very successful, but for very, very different reasons than an interesting and dynamic Tekken game might be successful. So that kind of worries me a little bit, and I hope we don't go into an even more casual and even more restricted version of Tekken in the future, because that would I think maybe be more commercially successful than any Tekken game that's ever existed. Maybe it becomes one of these giant esports games, but those of us who love this game for its more traditional elements might become disinterested at that point, and maybe be forced to abandon the franchise, which would be very, very sad, because as you can obviously tell, this is a franchise and a game that means a lot to me. It really does. As much shit as I talk, I have so many memories of playing this game. I moved to this country the same month, more or less, this game came out in the arcades, and so my life in this country and Tekken 7 specifically are kind of interconnected, and I think when we have Tekken 8 or whatever, I will always look back on the Tekken 7 era as the era where, I really started to play this game seriously, became a content creator, had all these memories, went to tournaments and all the rest of it. So yeah, just some quick thoughts that were in my head on movement today, and definitely let me know what you think. Do you prefer this version of the game? Do you think this is the sweet spot, or would you like for it to be adjusted in the future? And also, this thing of backdash versus sidestep. I think that backdashing is still very important, something you should practice in this game, but I feel like sidestepping is becoming less and less significant. But it depends on the matchup and all the rest of it. And I'm going to stop before I start rambling. So thank you so very much for watching this video. Let me know what you thought, and I'll see you guys again very soon.